Introducing next gen.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome in. This is the Justice Youth Talk Show. Today we're going to have our associate producer, Lauren, take over the conversation with the lovely Brendan Eukins. And yeah, I'm going to just toss it over to Lauren. We can get started right away.
Yes. Hey, everybody. Today we are so lucky to have Mr. Brendan on our podcast today. We're going to be digging into the fight for LGBTQIA plus justice in a system that too often fails to protect and even targets queer and trans lives. We're looking at how harmful policies, especially past administration and current administrations, have just created lasting impacts, from incarceration to education, streets to the courtroom. We're going to be trying to get into all of it. First question, kind of digging just right in. Can you explain what specific policies or rollbacks from the Trump administration affected transgender people in prison?
So, thank you for covering the topic. It's really, really important that we're talking specifically about transgender people. I know we tend to lump LGBTQIA all together.
Yeah.
And at this time in our history, it's really important that we're focusing on the most vulnerable people in our community. And right now, those are transgender people.
Yeah.
And really, all of this is centered around Executive Order 14168. Now, 14168 makes the false claim that people will absolutely have to adhere to their assigned biological sex at birth.
Yeah.
This doesn't make scientific sense. So for years and years and years, when people were getting their biology degree, they would have them test their blood for chromosomes, right, to see if they were XX or XY. And universities across America stopped doing this because they found that there was more than 16 variations of chromosomes that people are born with.
Yeah.
And the students were having the very rough realization when they tested their blood that they actually didn't adhere a lot of the times to XX and XY. And what this order does is it creates a false scientific paradigm in which people are either male or female,
Yeah.
in that it insists that that means that they're either a man or a woman. And what this does is it completely rolls back decades of research against what we know. And then as it filters down through all the different systems, particularly in the Department of Justice, this has meant human rights violations.
Mm.
So it's meant that transgender women are trying to be filed into male prisons. It has meant that people are denied their HRT, their hormone replacement treatment, while
Yeah.
they are incarcerated. And this is in violation of two previous things, the PREA, which is the prevention of rape and incarcerated act, and it also is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act,
Yeah.
because having gender dysphoria is a disability, and so when you take medication away from people, right, you're in violation of their rights. So that's the bombshell that we are all dealing with as clinicians and social workers in America today.
Which is so sad to hear, but also not surprising. And I think that's why these conversations need to happen. Going straight in also to what were the justifications given for these policies surrounding our current administration?
Yeah, so the justifications for these policies are all involved with this idea of gender ideology,
Yeah.
right? Where conservatives and Republicans, but I'm going to say conservatives in general, have always asserted that trans rights and learning about ourselves and learning about our gender is some sort of ideological crusade that
Right.
everybody is on. Now, as you know, the loving husband of a transgender wife, I can absolutely tell you that there's no crusade. As far as the crusade goes, it's me and her going down to the beauty supply store and trying to figure out if we can actually get a good deal on a human lace front wig.
Right.
Crusade that we are on, right? But what has happened is they have capitalized on a very old bias that has existed in American culture for a while.
Yeah.
And one is the demonization of gender expression as some sort of sexual fetish. That's number one.
Yeah.
And the second is this protectivism, specifically around children, or
Yeah.
this idea that children are taught to be transgender,
Yeah.
which is not the case.
Yeah.
In the vast majority of families that I've worked with when I was a SAS clinician, which is screening assessment and social services in Chicago, the kids were fighting for their life in a family that was not supportive.
Yeah.
So it's kind of remarkable to me that that there's this idea that the kids are learning something or being coached into something when in reality they're usually fighting for themselves in very hostile circumstances.
Yeah. And also to raise just awareness to even letting kids know information, giving them the knowledge. I mean, we can talk about when kids are supposed to learn about sexuality and gender and what age anybody feels like it's appropriate. But I think knowing and just having the knowledge that this is real, there are people out here living these types of lives, and it is okay for you if you're exploring that or whatever the case may be, is extremely important. And I think it does contribute kind of to my next question on how do these policies directly contribute to the increased violence within the community, including rape? You talked about rape and including assault against transgender inmates and even like outside of the prison system.
To understand the effect of incarceration, you have to understand the effect of having your bodily autonomy stripped from you.
Yeah.
So when I mean, I'm on a podcast that people are probably familiar with the fact that this is modern day slavery,
Yeah.
right? This is the only way in our country where you are able to force people away from control of their self, their personhood, as well as any sort of ideas or independent thought. We deny people the right to vote who are incarcerated. And when people come out of incarceration, We do everything in our power to make sure that they cannot reintegrate into society,
Yeah. Yeah.
including having to report, right, when they are trying to get a job that they were incarcerated. And
Yeah.
usually the employer doesn't even care why they were incarcerated. You could be incarcerated for, civil disobedience. You could be
Yeah.
speaking up for your rights, and suddenly you can't get a job anymore. In the process of going in to an incarcerated setting is supposed to dehumanize the person.
Yeah.
So what that means is that all of us, right, are free agents when we're born. All of us are born free. And so what you have to do is convince somebody that they are not human. And it's a stageal process, right? And the reason that it works is because our attachment bonds are formed by people that we perceive to either be wiser than ourselves or stronger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And most people know that the incarcerations, it's not wise, so it's going to rely on brute force. So
Right.
what does this mean? It means a procedure where you go in, strip searched, cavity searched, right, which is a humiliating process for anybody to ever have to go through. It means delicing or delousing, right? It means oftentimes if people have anything like they might be pressured to like shave hair, right, do anything that is going to make them quote unquote hygienic,
Yeah.
right, as they're coming into the space.
Yeah.
So hygiene becomes a way to imply two things. Number one, it's okay for me to invade your bodily autonomy in the sake of hygiene. And two, that you are dirty as a person.
Right.
And that's just the first step. That's just when you come in, right? Then
Right.
there's control over your sleep time, your wake time, when you eat, how you communicate with other inmates,
Yeah.
activities that are there.
Yeah.
One of my hats is I serve as a board member for the American Horticultural Therapy Association. And so we use gardening. We use gardening with people.
Right.
Um, and I just held a consultation last month with horticultural therapists for ADHTA, and um, about a large percentage of the populations that we serve are people that are incarcerated.
Yeah.
And so we work in prisons, both adult and juvenile. And they're all standing around. They say, how are we gonna stake our tomatoes? Because they won't let us even bring a stake in to stake the tomatoes because they're
Right.
afraid that the inmates are gonna take it and use it as a weapon.
Right.
And so when you think about all of these different layers, the point is to assert the authority of the state by way of power over the person. And the last line that this executive order has now pushed that to is that includes your gender.
Yeah.
Your body, your corpus, right, is not your own.
Yeah.
You do not know your body, you don't know yourself.
Yeah.
But what we as a state are going to do is we are going to come in and we are going to insist that you are this specific gender. And if you are doing anything that has been saving you from suicide, from depression, from everything,
Mm.
right? We're
Mm.
going to take those medications away from you.
Mm.
And all of this is to make sure that people don't view themselves as human beings.
Yeah.
Because the second that you stop viewing yourself as a human being, you forget that you are somebody's child. You forget that you are somebody's mother or father. And it is exactly what the state wants us to be,
Yeah.
because
The whole,
that means we're maximum productive.
yeah, the whole idea of individuality and like what that looks like now and how we're just conforming to whatever standard they want to put out there.
hmm And that's why it's so easy to get people to participate in prison labor programs where they're getting paid, well, like $1.25 for
Yeah.
doing this. Everyone loves to pretend, oh, slavery is not here anymore. Look outside. Look at all of the license plates that you see.
Mm.
A lot of those license plates are made in prisons. There
Really?
are there are material goods that you have that are generated through prison labor,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's unfortunately it's the toxic water that we swim in.
Um, okay, yeah. Transitioning to our next question. how have you seen LGBTQIA plus identities show up or impact someone's experience with incarceration? Because I know you have experience like working with people that you know who have been incarcerated, either queer or trans.
Mhm. So this attachment bond that I'm talking about, powerful versus wiser, is the main thing that people will have to relearn over time.
Yeah,
So when people are incarcerated, this whole system has taught them to only listen to people that they perceive as stronger than them because
right,
that's how they survived in prison.
right.
So that is person to person, right? Peer to peer. And then it's also between authority figures. And what we have, and it's a form of brainwashing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh, and so what you have to do very, very slowly is start to incorporate back that wisdom. Now, as a like as a white therapist, right, as a white practitioner, I
yeah,
look I look physically like the people that have put a lot of my clients into the system.
yeah,
And so the trick is that I it's not my wisdom,
yeah,
right, that they need to listen to. Because if I take that as my treatment plan, what am I doing besides teaching them to listen to white men?
right,
Right?
right.
You have to think bigger. And so what we do is I start by asking them to reconnect with the community that they came from. And I usually start within the family system. I'm looking for stories of wisdom from their family,
Yeah,
things that they
yeah,
kept with them even through incarceration.
yeah,
Do you remember the tricks that your mother used to never lose her temper, right? Do you remember the tricks that your uncle used? And with queer people in particular, the wisdom that we have is sometimes not biological wisdom. We're only 30 years out from the AIDS epidemic, which
yeah,
was a genocide. I just so we're on the same page. And so a lot of our community was killed.
yeah,
What that means is that the wisdom that usually would be passed intergenerationally is few and far between. Now, I'm very, very lucky that my godfather is Miguel Gomez, who is the head of the AIDS Coalition for the U.S. government, and he went to hundreds of funerals during that
yeah,
time, and my godmother, and so the stories that they have, I'm able to take and to share with people, and I'm also a proud drag uncle to the House of Banks here in Chicago. So my wife is Ziggy Banks, who's a drag queen in Chicago, and um, the wisdom that we have through the drag houses is also one of the ways that we pass wisdom down.
yeah,
And for people who have been incarcerated, right, part of the wisdom that they need is how to access their gender affirming care. I can sit here as a therapist and say, "Oh, go to Howard Brown or go to any of the clinics and like access the hormones. Here's your referral." It's a lot different to be talking with a T girl who is able to sit across from you and say, "This is what my pills look like, or this is what my shot looks like. This
yeah.
is how you inject it." Yeah.
And also, I do wanna pivot just a little bit on how incarceration, just more questions on incarceration on the youth from the LGBTQIA community. Um, do you know how our administration, the things that are being perceived online, things are being picked up, especially because a lot of the youth is online. A lot of the youth is participating on social media and getting a lot of their ideas from that. Do you know how those systems are affecting on our youth today within the community?
Yeah. So I think the what you have to keep in mind is that the social media platforms that you use are
Yeah,
controlled.
yeah,
They are not an organic algorithm that is just happening. And so oftentimes when people are looking for that wisdom, right, to attach to, and they're looking online and they're looking at the social media platforms, you have to be aware that at any moment when you're looking at it, you are not seeing a huge section of your community.
yeah, yeah,
So, Instagram is famous for this. They'll blacklist people where all of a sudden you have 200, 300 views on your story, and then all of a sudden you have like 3 to 8.
Right, right. Yeah,
It usually is happening after people write something that ruffles the feathers of the owners. And so when you're thinking about youth populations, excuse me, who are incarcerated, it's very possible that people are writing their stories, that people are putting them out on social media, that people want to be heard.
yeah,
But the level of censorship that they're experiencing, because it's a soft censorship,
yeah,
right? It's not like
yeah,
you're not just totally being, and sometimes it is. Sometimes people are completely banned for the platform just for speaking
yeah,
out, right?
yeah,
But it's a level of critical consciousness that I am concerned that young people don't have, right? Is that analysis.
yeah,
Everything that you see has already been through a filter.
yeah.
You need to lead with that understanding.
And I want to, speaking of that, like speaking of the people that we're looking up to, is that something that keeps you going in the work? Like when it gets hard, like the progress we're making, even if it's very little, and like what keeps you motivated with doing that? Because I think that's number one, bringing awareness to it is so important, but like engaging with the youth, how are you navigating that?
Lauren, I'm incredibly lazy. I do this because I have to.
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
to.
yeah,
I'm uh, the way that the way that I put it is very simple. Is that if I don't do this work, um, then my family suffers.
yeah,
And
yeah.
my wife was walking our dog Sugar the couple months back, and uh, I have a beautiful pit bull. She has 3 legs, and we love her, even though she wants to eat all of our food. And one of my former clients spotted my wife because she recognized the dog because I had walked Sugar out before, and they had seen. And they came up to her and they said, "Oh my God, like, I don't want to be weird, but is this Sugar? Is this Brennan's dog?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "Are you Brennan's wife?" I said, "Yeah." So he saved my life.
Wow.
This is a young transgender individual. I worked with them when they were a teenager, and I was responding to their suicide attempt. And um, they had a devil of a time with it, but now they're out from beneath their family's control. They have the legal right to pursue hormone replacement therapy on their own. They're living in a co-op, right? They're doing all of these wonderful things. And what you have to understand is that based on the salary that I make, I'm never gonna have my own children.
Mm,
I'm never that is a system that has been put in place that makes it very difficult for social workers or people that are not making tons and tons of money
yeah,
to adopt.
yeah,
These are my kids. This is my community. Um, when I'm with my little drag nieces and nephews, like, those are my nieces and nephews, because family to me is not just biological.
yeah,
And so the reason I do this work is because it hurts me. It hurts me when my kids are locked up.
yeah, yeah. Also, for going into maybe like some statistical questions, how, and also let's like go back about the homelessness within the LGBTQIA plus community
Mhm.
because I think we need to raise some immediate awareness to that. Um, what does data show about homelessness rates among the LGBTQIA plus youth,
Yeah.
especially in bigger cities? We're talking like Chicago, like New York City, a lot of cities where we have a big population of that community, and obviously we're everywhere, but let's talk about like what that looks like within bigger cities.
So the a lot of times you will hear the statistic about 40 to 50% of all youth that are unhoused are LGBTQIA plus.
Yeah,
The reason these statistics are hard to pin down is because it has to do with self-reporting and also who's asking the question,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you have to understand that, like, when you are in the shelter system in Chicago, for example, Some of these shelters are run by religious organizations that are not interested in housing transgender individuals.
Yeah.
So when they're doing their intake and they say, like, are you trans? Let's say that there's like a young trans woman who's been living on the street because her family threw her out for being trans 2 years ago, right?
Right.
She may or may not answer in that moment, like truthfully in quotation marks,
Hmm.
because she needs to figure out how to spend the night there. Um, it's called being stealth, right? When you try and closet yourself or hide yourself in order to access services, and I can't blame anybody for doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are also folks who cannot do stealth because they are at a place in their transition where it is very difficult to hide. So if you're working with a young trans person who has had top surgery and they have scarring, they're not going to be able to use a communal shower without getting picked on,
Yeah.
right? Because they're open and they're susceptible.
Yeah.
So that statistic that I say, it's a conservative estimate. It's an
Yeah.
extremely conservative estimate,
Yeah.
which means that in community, all of us are more familiar with being unhoused than a lot of our straight counterparts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the systems in place aren't there for us. I mean, I think of like when I was going through a divorce, I was having a very, very difficult time. And I was effectively unhoused for 2 months and living off of the graces of now my future wife, right? And that sort of oh, can I sleep on the couch,
Right.
can I be over here, I'm gonna rough sleep in my car for a year, right, or for an extended period of time. We're all more familiar with that narrative, and we're all much closer to that narrative because we are also more familiar with families that don't want us there, and
Yeah.
want us. And uh the particularly scary thing about this is that when you start adding the intersections of race, because it is one thing to be unhoused and being rough sleeping, but be able to present as
Yeah.
a young white person, right, and for the future, is a very different thing to be unhoused and be black or be Latino and
Yeah.
have the cops constantly coming and banging on your window when you're trying to
Yeah.
get a sleep in.
I think that's another great thing to bring up, the intersectionality of those two identities and what that looks like on the streets and what that looks like in the prison system and the legal system. Um, do you mind talking just a little bit more about that intersectionality of that part?
In terms of LGBTQ people in the prisons.
Yes, and people of color and what that looks like as well.
Yeah. So the suspicion against LGBTQ people of color is always going to be that they are somehow gang affiliated, right?
Yeah.
Gang affiliated. That's something that's always thrown out. Oh, they're gang affiliated, right? Let me explain to you what gang affiliation means in my city. Gang affiliation can mean that a gang member paid for your dental care. Gang
Hmm.
affiliation could mean that when you were coming to this country, the coyote who smuggled you is part of a gang. Gang affiliation could mean, like before the legalization of pot, so and so's cousin who is just like selling some weed just to make ends meet and make the rent. Some now they're in a gang, right? And
Yeah.
this is like dangerous. And then you turn right around and there are legal dispensaries where there are white people with huge bags of weed walking out every day.
Right.
So
Like.
it's different sets of laws for different people.
Right.
And the
Right.
reason is because the state is looking for excuses to incarcerate people.
Absolutely.
And if you and if you are, let's just say, like, if you are black and you are trans, right? Like my drag family is a black drag family in Chicago.
Hmm.
It's like they're always looking for those opportunities. It is incredible. It is incredible how often we are harassed just
Yeah.
going out and doing regular club business.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're gonna transition to a break right now. We're gonna come back with some more questions on this because this is incredibly important. But yeah, we're gonna switch it over to Jules for our commercial break.
Introducing Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Just Us Youth Talk Show.
Hi, welcome back,
Hello.
guys. I'm sorry, Miss Karen. I just wanted to say welcome back.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you. And Brendan and Lauren, you all have hit on so many topics that I wanted to try to expand on, and I didn't want to interrupt because you all had such a great flow. But when I think about, in general, with youth, and I know this is things that you all are already aware of, we already talked about the disproportionate numbers of LGBTQ plus youth in the juvenile justice system, the reasons for that being obviously discrimination in all forms, struggling with the lack of acceptance. And then the one that's really, really often big for me when I've worked with youth is the homelessness. And I wanted to try to piggyback on that a little bit. When I initially, when a lot of my work was solely focused on working with youth, they had this term with children who were thrown away because they wanted to make sure they understood that these children had not run away from home, but they had not been accepted. There were issues of abuse and neglect within the home. And then now we bring in gender issues and gender challenges and acceptance, and how that even creates such vulnerability. We know that particularly with youth, those first 48 hours on the street, they're the most vulnerable because they have all of these basic needs like a place to stay, to eat, sleep, and it's easy to get pulled into trafficking. And it's just so much that is happening for this particular population when they are homeless and don't have supports. And I'm just wondering, Brendan, what is available in Chicago? What can you speak to about supports that are coming in place to help with this? Because support is an issue, period. And then a large part of this population, too, are youth who have aged out of foster care, which is another big issue for me, where they age out and we're like done with you at 21. But we all know that at 21, most people are not ready to be completely independent, to take care of themselves. So all of this makes me think about a lack of support. Mm-hmm. And so what is being done to shore up support for this population in Chicago? What does it look like on a national level? Because a lack of support is really a large part of what we're looking at. This sort of leads into all these other areas that are so detrimental for youth. I know that was really long, but I wanted to set the stage for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the organization that most people in Chicago are familiar with is Broadway Youth Center. For a very long time, Broadway Youth Center was kind of a hub. They have drop-in hours, right? You could go. My ex-husband used to volunteer to be there, and it was a space where unhoused youth could come, and they would have access to medication. They would get referrals to like therapy, right? Things like this. Broadway Youth Center was absorbed into the Howard Brown system, and so the Howard Brown is the largest LGBTQ clinic, health clinic in the Midwest. And in that transition, there were a few bumps where because you have a smaller organization being absorbed into a larger organization, they lose a little bit of that grassroots connection and organizing. There's also organizations that specifically work with trans women in the city and Black trans women in the city. I have to dig up the referral, I have it, but all of these organizations now are threatened because now, with this new executive order that is against like the gender ideology, right? They're not going to have federal funding anymore. And so what does that mean? Okay, so you talk about the first 48 hours, right?
Yes.
What does that youth need in the first 48 hours? Housing first, right? They need a roof. They need somewhere to go to protect from the elements. And I'm not going to beleaguer this point, but anybody who lives in Chicago knows that you cannot live outside. You cannot. There are other cities that are more southern where like they have like very, very large tent encampments, like, are very large tent cities, right? Because it's a warmer climate. That's not the case in Chicago. Like living, like, rough sleeping outside is barely an option, right? Next thing they're going to need is food. Well, a lot of the food pantries, when you take away that federal funding, when you take away taxpayer dollars actually going to support these kids, it's going to fall to the churches. It's going to fall to like church soup kitchens, and they do wonderful work. I'm not here to say like, churches are bad, right? They're great. But those churches are able to discriminate within the justice system that we have. They are able to discriminate against LGBTQA and particularly transgender individuals. That was something that the Bush administration overturned. It used to be that religious organizations that are engaged in nonprofit work still had to maintain that separation and they couldn't have discriminatory policies. After the Bush administration, they said, oh, freedom of religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's perfectly acceptable for you to refuse services to someone that you feel like is in violation of your faith. And so, again, it's not that these supports are bad supports or that they shouldn't be there. They absolutely should. Your local church should keep their soup kitchen open. But there is no legal ramifications for these organizations discriminating against these youth. And that 48 hours,
Mm-hmm.
woo, I've seen that 48 hours just like
Yeah.
fall out
Yeah.
for many kids.
Yeah, it's so. I thank you for elaborating on that and sharing about the local organizations. I think that's probably going to help some of the viewers we have that may be listening. But that is such a true point about the impact of this current administration in terms of the just basic funding that meets some of those core needs that really are going to fall by the wayside. And you are right, the opportunity or the right to be able to say, well, I don't want to serve you because we don't share the same belief system. And so, I can deny you those basic rights. There, across the board, there should just be some basic core humanity where we would have concern about some basic well-being, and we know that that is not the case. So thank you for elaborating on that. And also that sort of just leads me into how a lot of times with youth facilities, there's not a lot of really good oversight. And sometimes I'm even concerned that maybe youth have been incarcerated inappropriately or unjustly. What are there any are there any supports in that system for those youth when that has been done? Then I'm also just thinking about um, the lack of support from family and things of that nature, because we always need someone to advocate for us. So if you already were on the street, didn't have someone that could really advocate, something happened that now you're incarcerated, either as a youth or young adult, and then you don't have someone present to advocate. I'm just wondering what's in place within that incarceration system, carceral system, if there is, that serves the LGBTQ population. It just seems like so much is in the way of them getting basic care and treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to come right back at you. I don't think there's any reason to put a kid in jail. That's wild. That's wild that I'm saying the words juvie or incarceration of youth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make any sense. You can't take freedom away from a child and expect them to be a healthy functioning adult. Absolutely not. And when I was working for, I used to work for Resilience, the Rape Crisis Center in downtown.
Okay.
And we were trying to advocate to be able to work with youth in Cook County system. So we go to the Cook County juvenile, and the youngest kid that I met that day was 12 years old. 12. It's like,
Wow.
like when it was happening, and it's that surreal moment as a social worker where you're kind of confronted with like the horrors of your home, right? Because there's no 12-year-old that I've ever worked. I mean, their brain is not done developing. This is like whatever they have been incarcerated for was not a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like what did the kid do? The kid steal? Did the kid hurt somebody? Did the kid beat somebody up? Okay, their brain is still developing. They have the opportunity to grow past that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you talk about like advocating for LGBTQ youth in that system, first of all, teenagers, because they are doing projective identification process, they become very, very nasty and mean towards queer youth that are their peers in their peer group. And the reason for that is because they're trying to figure out identity, they're trying to differentiate, they're going through a consolidation process. And so that's why when you're in school and you're dealing with like homophobic bullying and things like this, right, you have to actually teach kids, right, the tools of empathy and like why this isn't right, because that will play on the other part of being a teenager, which is extreme focusing on right and wrong and consolidating their sense of justice, right? So they have the tools necessary to be empathetic human beings. But when you go into a system, there's two things that will happen in that lack of oversight that you're talking about. The first of which is that some extremely violent adults are going to have a lot of access to a lot of kids.
Absolutely.
And we really have to, I respect so heavily my colleagues that work within the system. And we really have to do that analysis as adults that are working with vulnerable populations. Like, why is it that we want to work with these kids?
Right.
Because I've worked in both schools and in systems where I am in a classroom or I'm doing an IEP meeting and I'm like, wow, like you're really out here trying to like push this kid into jail, aren't you? And it's revolting. The other thing that we have to understand is that LGBTQ adults that are working with kids have the lowest rate of perpetration of any sort of sexual violence onto those kids. Usually the ones that are perpetrating the sexual violence, particularly onto the kids, are adults that fall under those like CDC major risk factors for sexual violence, one of which is included is strict adherence to gender. So you cannot find this on the CDC website today because the Trump administration has wiped it all out. But when I was working at Resilience, one of the things that I used to do in terms of prevention education was talk about how strict adherence to gender norms is one of the leading risk factors for sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
So the communities that we see higher rates of sexual violence in are usually ones in which women are silenced, right? In which women don't have leadership positions, in which like men are encouraged to be strong and be men, right? These lead to sexual violence because it is going back to that attaching to someone more powerful or stronger, not someone more wise. The more that we do that, the more that people feel like they have to assert their power, particularly masculine people feel like they have to assert their power. And so the advocacy for these kids is usually being done not by a queer adult because we're viewed with suspicion, right? When we're trying to work for these organizations and institutions. When I was a SAS clinician, I had to fight with my colleagues all the time about using the kids' proper pronouns. And then all of a sudden, I'm the only clinician on my team that had no rehospitalizations. And they were like, wow, Brendan is doing such a good job. And I was like, it's because I'm using their name.
And which is a basic sign of respect. I mean,
Right.
essentially, that is what the challenge is a lack of respect for how people are identifying, is preventing people from providing basic care, which should not be the case.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, you even see it in the way, I mean, and respect for kids is something that we just lack as a society. The number of times that I've had to correct people that call babies it, I said, that baby is they. That's a human being. Just because they're a baby doesn't mean that they're not a human being. And they're like, well, after my sister had it. And I was like, after your sister had them. Or he or she, right? What, you know, like,
Right.
the baby is a human being. But the reason that we do this is because we live in a society, again, right, that wants to strip us of our humanity.
Yeah.
And in order to make us, you know, like more productive worker bees. But it really gets impressionable with the kids where you're like, wow, the fundamental respect for the kids isn't there. And then the advocacy for the kids is difficult because there's this focus on the family, right? As this old more conservatives during like the Newt Gingrich revitalization of the right wing, they did this whole focus on the family, and this idea that like the family is the cornerstone, right, of American society. And as someone who works with family systems, I can tell you that none of this is pro-family.
Yeah.
It limits the definition of family, right? When I was talking about as a queer person, like these are my kids, right? If I focus on the family, right, that is cut. That connection is cut instantly. And we have to be very wary of any policy that restricts the definition of family, restricts the definition of marriage, restricts the definition of fealty. So, like, you know how when a kid has an unsafe living environment, they can go and they can live maybe with like another family member who is a safe
Uh-huh.
family member, and that's really important, right? So that they're not just being torn away from their whole family system. Well,
Exactly.
what does that mean when we restrict the definition of family? Suddenly, your cousin that you've lived with in the same neighborhood for years and years and years isn't your real cousin anymore, because that's just a colloquialism that your mom and her best friend, who've been friends forever, have used to describe your relationship to this other child, right? So, yeah, focus on the family really just means tearing the family asunder. And don't even get me started about how it prefers men over women 100
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
I see so many billboards for fathers' rights. I have never seen a billboard for mothers' rights. As I have
Oh,
been driving around.
there are a lot of things that stand out. You're right, that we don't see. Lauren, thank you so much for letting me jump in and not completely hijack, but just throwing a few things where I could ask Brendan to elaborate. I do appreciate that. I'm throwing it back on you. Thank you so much for what you shared, Brendan. Incredibly helpful for the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah. Oh my God, so many questions that just rose from that conversation. Y- number one, before I get into like a little bit more of the housing aspect, I kind of want to raise awareness to the censorship that is going on in schools. Things like bathroom bills, book bans, and just curriculum censorship. We don't have to like get into it because you talked a lot about it, but needs to be addressed and put out there that these things are really happening, and the lack and the access of knowledge about almost everybody's identity is being censored, and we need to raise a lot of awareness to that. But going kind of broadening it a little bit more, how do existing shelter systems and like re-entry planning and post-release support of LGBTQIA plus youth and even adults in the community, how are like what does that look like, especially post incarceration or like even before that for sure?
Yeah. Well, I'll start right off the back. There is no formalized referral process for gender affirming care for youth as it stands today. So when a youth has been incarcerated and then they're coming out of that system and they're meeting, the social worker, the case manager, right, and things like this, it is solely based on the wherewithal and the knowledge of that individual case manager to ask the questions of whether or not they need gender affirming care, to direct them with the referral base, right?
Yeah.
The Trump administration has done all of this, that anything that receives federal funding, that's going to be stripped.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of relying on the individual knowledge of these caseworkers, of these therapists, and not all of them are going to have the expertise. I mean, it's wild to me that coming out of that system, that you're not looking at the risk factors that got someone there in the first place. Ms. Karen talked about like children that have been thrown away,
Hmm.
right? If you want to figure out how to reintegrate that kid into a community, you have to figure out why they were thrown away in the first place, because
Right.
that is the heart of their trauma. That's the heart of their wound. And
Right.
if you're able to solve that, then you can take somebody and you can take all of their skill sets, all of their knowledge, and like turn that into a positive light.
Yeah.
So, with with their like, and it goes right down to the bathrooms, right? Because you mentioned the bathroom bills. Um, when I was working at a turnaround school, at a charter school, um, something that would happen is that there was this huge maximization of productivity or student productivity in these moments because they're trying to get the test scores up. And they were really, really on the kids about using the bathroom or asking to use the bathroom. And so kids would go through several periods where the teacher would say, no, you can't use the bathroom. No, you can't use the bathroom. And they keep raising their hand. And the child would urinate on themselves,
Yeah.
which I just want you to think about, like, when you're a kid, how humiliating that is, how, like, in front of your peers, right? How painful that is, because that is a pain that you've been sitting with for hours on end. I
Yeah.
know you haven't been learning
Yeah.
during that time, right?
Yeah.
You've been suffering. And again, it is to impose this idea that an adult, somebody else, has ownership over your body and that they are stronger, right? And
Yeah.
they have control over your body.
Yeah.
Now, flip that over to the bathroom conversation. What does it mean that people are forbidden from using the bathroom that would make them the most comfortable?
Hmm.
It means that that's what they're suffering. I know a lot of trans youth that go to schools that are not, at least colloquially, supportive of their gender identity. And so they would dehydrate themselves before they go to school. They didn't drink anything. They didn't drink any water. They didn't drink any tea, nothing. They didn't
Right.
drink anything.
Right.
Dehydration is extremely, extremely dangerous to a growing system.
Okay. Yeah.
And so all these bathroom bills, all of these little things, and they seem almost kind of silly when we talk about them, like, oh, pee free, and like, yeah, you can use whatever bathroom, and you'll go restaurants that are like more liberal, quote unquote, will be like, huh, we don't care, like whatever you want. And it's really trivializing a very serious issue, because when you deny someone access to a restroom, what you're actually doing is you're putting them in physical torturous pain for long
Yeah.
periods of time.
Yeah.
And again, all of it is to maintain power and control over a population,
Right.
right? All of it is to say, like, I am more powerful than even your basic human functioning.
Right. Segueing into some questions from the audience.
Mhm.
We have, what are the training and qualification requirements of juvenile officers in working with youth from the LGBTQIA plus community?
Um, so, and I'll be honest that I'm not as familiar with the training for the office. I'll be like upfront about that.
Mhm.
Since it's not my field. I do know that like probation officers, which is and folks that are working, they might have like a requirement for very basic like LGBTQIA training. The ones that I have seen, because I did when I was working at the Rape Crisis Center, part of my job as a preventionist was working and doing the training for police officers.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this the nicest way possible. The officers don't have to listen to you. Like I'm extremely charismatic. I think I'm kind of cute. Right now I'm in like a more like less formal attire, but I have my little button shirt on and my little blazer like to go
Yeah.
talk to them. And I had an advantage because I was a man and I was a white man. I didn't have visible tattoos at the time, right? So I was very like respectable, whatever that even means. And I made a lot of headway with the officers that I was talking to, but it's all very one-on-one information. And again, it falls down to the individual officer to implement it. So if you go into a one-on-one LGBTQIA training, they'll have like the genderbread person. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oh, like, what is this? And they'll have some terms, some definitions, right? But they don't talk about genocide.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
don't talk about the 10 stages of genocide and how we're being killed systemically by the government, because that would be too much. That would make the officers uncomfortable because then they would they would have to realize that they're part of a genocidal system, and that will piss them off. And the thing that is wild to me is that you spend so much time in these officer trainings trying to flatter them and trying to make sure that they are not upset over what you are saying. And that stripped me of my humanity because I'm talking about my family,
Right.
about my community.
Right.
And suddenly I have to convince with my silver tongue this room of people who's frankly unsympathetic. And I have no guarantee that there's any teeth in what I'm saying,
Right.
right? Because they could sit there and listen to me and walk out. I had colleagues where officers during like a very basic sexual assault training would stand up and say, I don't have to listen to this shit. And they would walk out. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast. But like and you have to also keep in mind that a lot of the police force is made up of people that are already traumatized
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
coming in.
Yeah.
There's a high it's not just a veteran population, it is a recent deployment veteran population. So they're coming fresh off the battle, they're keyed up, and they're ready to go after civilians in the same way that they went after people abroad, which is a whole nother conversation about why exactly we think it's okay to do that.
Right.
But if it's a room full of very like touchy, jumpy people who are already having their trauma reactions, and you're trying to get them to like calmly address a traumatized youth who's in the first 48 hours of being thrown out by their family, and that youth is all bouncy, and the tools that they have in their arsenal again are ones of I am stronger than you. They are
Yeah.
much more likely to use a top dog approach as opposed to patience, understanding, time, securing a safe environment, right?
Yeah.
So you say what training they have. I said, what does the training matter?
No, literally. And transitioning to our last question, just kind of a two-parter. In light of the current administration, what are some things we and organizations can do to fill the funding gap in order to meet the presenting needs of these youth? And also, when you're done with that, just like put out your information there. Also, put out the information about your garden and you as a therapist, because just want to reiterate, Brendan is coming from a very unique perspective as a mental health specialist and as a therapist. So yeah, just want to put
Yeah.
there too.
What can we do to make up for the funding? You can tax the rich. And this is why I'm saying this. I love this. My first policy class when I was getting my social work degree, my master's in social work, is an explanation of the difference between private donations and public funding. Let's say that you have a gala or like a fundraiser, and everybody comes out, everyone's dressed really nicely, and everyone's making these huge, like $1,000 donations, right, all night long. And let's say that you are like one of the best nonprofits. You might walk away from that gala with like $77,000 that you've been able to raise. And you might think, wow, $77,000. We did that as a community. That is maybe if you pay people like 30 some thousand, which is like not a livable wage,
Yeah.
maybe you're gonna squeeze like 2 case managers for 1 year out of that.
Yeah.
And what quality of service are you gonna get if somebody's underpaid? Let me let you know a secret. When I was working for Lutheran Social Services of Illinois, and there were 4 of us on my team, and we covered the north and west sides of the city of Chicago. So we were the only ones that were on the other end of the line when somebody attempted suicide, was going into psychosis, autistic kid was having an aggressive episode, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I was paid $19.75 an hour. I had $30 in my checking account. I was strapped. I was
Yeah.
getting COVID, right?
Yeah.
And somehow I had to keep showing up at all hours. It's 24-hour crisis line. Like somehow keep showing up for the kids.
Right.
And Lutheran Social Services of Illinois, they have a private donation stream, right?
Yeah.
When you look at taxpayer dollars gives you a systemic, big, robust funding stream that cannot be replicated by private donations, no matter how wealthy an individual is.
Yeah.
We absolutely have to tax the rich.
Yeah.
They have to pay their fair share, or else we all suffer, And there's all that research that says after $100,000, it's like your life doesn't actually get better anyways, right?
Yeah.
It's like people talk about losing all this money in the stock market. I was like, oh no, you went from 300 billion to 288.
Right.
So yeah, that's the funding stream. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Yes.
Cool. My information, my name is Brendan Eukins. I'm a staff therapist at The Expansive Group. You can find us through Google search. You can also look at #QueerSexTherapy is the Instagram handle that you can use to find us. I specialize in intimacy after violence, whether that is sexual or intimate partner violence or family abuse. My garden is Chase Park Community Gardens. It's here at the intersection of the Uptown, Ravenswood, and Andersonville neighborhoods in Chicago. You can email me, brendan.eukins@gmail.com. I'm happy to field questions and things like this. And more importantly, even if you don't get in touch with me, I want you to get in touch with your community. I want you to talk. I want you to share this conversation with people that you know and people that you love, because that connection is what helps us survive.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing all of this. This is wonderful. Keep fighting the good fight.
Of course. You too. All right, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.